Happy February and welcome to Black History Month, TeenMaptivists. I'm Ivana Maurimota from the American Geographical Society. Today we have Clinton Johnson, a true trailblazer in the geospatial field, who is a National Geographic Explorer, the Racial Equity and Social Justice Lead at Esri, the SVP Senior Vice President in a mapping role with the NAACP, and founder of NorthStar of GIS, a nonprofit which organizes a global community of Black geo students, educators, professionals, and allies using maps to create a more equitable world. Welcome, Clinton. We're grateful to have you here with us today. Thank you for being here.
Thanks for having me, Ivana.
To start off, geography isn't a clear path to find, especially when many public schools do not have geography classes, and it isn't a path most of us have direct role models in. Could you tell us a little more about your story and how you came across maps?
I grew up in the city of Philadelphia, where, as you said, there in the public schools that I had gone to, there were very few opportunities to interact with maps or to learn about maps outside of a social studies course or not even so much a geography course, but a history course. And these were the spaces where we were looking at maps and talking about geography. And even though place was a part of every single story that we would explore through history, the maps themselves were just a minimal aspect of the work. So when I got into my first role in the city of Philadelphia, the same city that I grew up in, a role I got into following sort of the footsteps of people in my family. And when I got to that first job, right behind the area that I worked were a bunch of maps. And these maps were big, old, almost plasticky maps. They were made of a material called vellum. And on these maps were the lines and the points that reflected every street in the city and many of the utilities that were underneath those streets, the water pipes, the electric lines above and below. And these maps were cool to look at, but for me at the time, they just weren't that interested. And then at some point, while I was really interested in data, someone told me that, hey, downstairs is a whole team that combines data, technology, and maps. And they do it through this tool called GIS. And then I was intrigued. And when I, finally got connected with GIS or digital interactive maps, computers, data, and maps combined, that's when I really got excited about maps.
So you came across paper maps and later GIS while you were working for your city. Could you talk more on how you witnessed maps in that context and how did that shape your path?
I had also had encounters where, once I was really getting embedded into mapping and folks were really trying to get me excited, about maps. I got invited to this tour of one of the city buildings, a special area that had all these historic maps. And one set of maps were these redlining maps. And I had heard about that a little bit in school. But now I was sitting in front of the, copies of these maps that were blown up on a big table, and I could see my neighborhood where I grew up. I could see all of the neighborhoods that I had gone to schools in while I was growing up, and all of them were in redline communities. I could see where my family lived, and they were all in redlined areas. And I learned through that conversation that when my grandparents moved to Philadelphia in the 1950s, it was unlikely that they would have been able to live any other place except in one of those red line areas because the government, the other policymakers, real estate agencies, and everyone involved in influencing where people could live were directing people based on the color of their skin, the countries that they were from. They were directing them to either red-lined areas or yellow-lined areas or blue or green-lined areas. And it got real for me, right? I could also see the differences between where the great schools in Philly were and the not so great schools. The schools that had advanced curriculum and the schools that did not. And the power of maps in making that happen. This infusion of ideas about which racial group is better or worse or worthy of investment or not worthy of investment have become embedded in our city. And even though those maps themselves weren't being used anymore, the footprints of those maps, the impact of those maps lingered and remained.
Geographic approaches have long been used to advance racist notions, like you've explained with redlining, as an example in the United States. Um, Yet maps are also a powerful tool that can be reclaimed by Black, Latinx, Asian, Indigenous, and other marginalized communities. What opportunities do you see to address racism, particularly in the geo world, and how have you encouraged that with your work?
When I think about, advancing um, anti-racism or eliminating racism or other systems of oppression through maps, I think about two different kinds of work that are very much related. One side of that work is making sure that whoever is doing geography related work, anybody who's making a map, anybody who is using maps and data to make decisions, all of them understand racism, systems of oppression, and how previous maps that may have been racist will influence the maps that they create going forward. So that's important. So equitable approaches, fair approaches, just approaches to geo work is important. But the other side of it is representation. And while for a relatively long time now, for the past several hundred years, there have been organized efforts to use maps to do harm, to use maps to segregate neighborhoods, so that some racial groups live in some neighborhoods and others live in others, so that some resources go to some neighborhoods and harms go to other neighborhoods. Um, Maps have been used on a grander scale to decide which groups could immigrate into which countries at which time based on different people's opinions on race or ethnicity. While that has been the case, it's also possible to use those tools to advance justice, to use those tools to eliminate racism. So through my work with the NorthStar of GIS, we organize a global network of Black geo students, educators, entrepreneurs, and professionals. We try to get young people excited about opportunities in GIS and in mapping, both opportunities to do something good for their communities and also opportunities to just do something fun and exciting. So we have to get to a place where not only are the maps and the data that we use around maps are more just, more equitable. We also have to get to a point where the people who are doing that work um, are are of the communities that are most impacted by that work. And we have to get past conversations about just simple access to broadband to and simple digital literacy to a place where Black and brown folks are more consistently getting exposed to opportunities to learn how to build their own maps, create their own understanding of the world through maps, be the owners and the innovators of maps and other technology that drives the world.
I love how you mention it's not only literacy. It's not just literacy. It's not just looking at maps, but enabling Black, Latinx, Indigenous people to be creators, innovators, owners of that work too. I would love to hear what advice or guidance that you would give young people interested in helping their community as maptivists, and what would you tell your younger self?
Yeah. First of all, when I think about that term maptivist, it feels to me like it's this combination of map and activist. And when we think about what an activist is and what an activist does, well, they activate. They activate others, they activate organizations, and they activate with the purpose of creating positive change. They are trying to get tuned into the needs and challenges and experiences and opportunities of communities on the ground, perhaps your own communities. They are understanding that the world around us is not an accident. The access that we have to great schools or lower quality schools, the access that we have to great medical resources or not, the access that we have to healthy, affordable food at grocery stores versus access to cheap but readily available artificial sugars in candy. These things are not by accident. And activists understand that by encouraging organizations to do something different, to invest in communities differently, that we can see a change in the world. And maps are a great tool for any kind of activism. So I would tell the young future maptivists, Clinton, and the young future maptivists or the current maptivists of today that they can influence change in the world. They can get their peers and the organizations that they love, that they enjoy, the companies that they buy products from, the city that serves them. They can get those organizations excited about changing the world in a way that will make life better for themselves and for their community. And I would absolutely tell young Clinton that.
Thank you so much for sharing your story and perspective with us, Clinton. We appreciate you very much.
Thank you so much for having me and for making space for a great conversation like this.